us on a Friday night. I know a lot of you have a lot of stuff to do on Friday, but if you're watching this show, I guarantee you it'd be a lot more interesting than whatever plans that you guys may have previously had. So, something very important happened 2 days ago, and I'm not necessarily talking about the riots that went down in DC, but Congress decided to confirm the election of now soon to be President Joe Biden. But what can we expect from Joe Biden? This is a man who's been vice president for 8 years and has been in Congress since the nation was formed. So, what can we expect from his foreign policy? This is a very important question that we're going to see play out over the next 4 years. And here to answer that question is a man that needs no introduction. You all know him, Mr. Scott Horton. How are you doing, man?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me. Good to talk to you again.
Absolutely. So I got the idea to have you on the show again because I was hearing you on Dave Smith's part of the Problem podcast talking about the legacy of Donald Trump. And awesome as that was, what I really want to know is what can we look forward to in the future? Joe Biden isn't exactly an unknown quantity like Donald Trump was. He's been in the Senate forever, and he was vice president under Barack Obama for 8 years. So there's a lot there that we already know about. But foreign policy is one of those things that America doesn't really change over time. So in general, what are your thoughts on like the biggest things that we can expect from Joe Biden going forward?
Well, it's hard to know where to begin. I guess, on the big picture level, the narrative has it in the center, and especially, the center left liberal Democrat types, that Trump's greatest sin was that he undermined and didn't respect and advance the narrative of America's sacred mission to remake the world in
Right.
our own image, which is really just a cheap excuse for imperialism is what it is. But it's, all this exceptionalism and all this stuff. If you read a year ago, Biden wrote in Foreign Affairs about how, we must, I forgot the exact language, but, restore our commitment, our sacred commitment to the NATO alliance in Europe. Right. So this entangling alliance, as George Washington told us to never get into with the Europeans in the first place, is now sacred. And it must continue indefinitely. It's essentially part of the American Constitution itself, our permanent alliance with as many European states as we can possibly add, even if they don't have a strategic reason that they could tell you out loud without, admitting, well, we're picking a fight with Russia so we can sell weapons and this kind of crap, which is what's really going on. But, I think Dave actually was the one who pointed out how just what trouble Trump got in. And one of the things that they hated about him so much was when he did that interview with Bill O'Reilly. And Bill O'Reilly goes, come on, do business with the Russians, but they're bad. Putin, he kills people. And Trump says, come on, you think we're so innocent?
It's like we do business with Saudi Arabia. What do we care if
sure,
governments
well,
kill
but
people?
the thing of it is that, no, you're not allowed to say that, right? Even when we do business with Saudi Arabia, that's not a sin. That's a virtue because we're the ones doing it. You're not allowed to say, come on, everybody knows our hands are dirty as hell over here when it comes to this or that. Just with the realism that you just responded. Come on, what are you talking about? The Saudis, they cut their dissidents' heads off and then crucify the headless corpse to show as an example to everybody else. Those are our closest allies in the world, after Israel. And in fact, that's part of why we're so close allies with them is because of Israel. But anyway, this is what they hated about Donald Trump is he didn't have, he doesn't have a personal commitment to anything except himself, right? So he didn't have a commitment to this vision of, broadly speaking, the post-World War II American world order that, for a long time was the American world order less the communist bloc. Now it's the whole damn world. And that's it. Full spectrum dominance. That's what they're trying to push for and refuse to acknowledge that, as everyone else on earth knows, that the high watermark of the American empire was in 2003 when George Bush blew his dad's entire wad and America's entire wad on the way to the store. right? Like they never got their dominance at all, right? They let Junior drive the car and he crashed and he ruined everything. And everything has been absolutely downhill, attempted mopping up exercises in the Middle East since then, trying to correct for the mistakes that they made there, and trillions of dollars wasted, massive financial crisis. And then, the destabilization that came with George W. Bush, who, after all, was Prescott Bush's son, right? I mean, this was the establishment center's guy who got us into this. And the destabilization that he caused ended up leading to Obama and then to Trump as a backlash then to Obama. And so, the world order, the precarious state that the world order is in is not because of Trump. It's because the people who were in charge of, who were its stewards, ruined everything. That's why we got Trump in the first place. And the fact that he was such a basket case and such a poor leader, leading to the return of the establishment center left, in the form of Joe Biden, is no vindication of the establishment that he defeated. I mean, it's meaningful that Donald freaking Trump, of all people, was able to stop Jeb Bush and Hillary Clinton in 1 year. It was because of what they represent. It wasn't just personal. It was because this is George Bush's brother and Bill Clinton's wife. These are the people who've been in power this whole time. George Bush's son, too. They've been in power this whole time. And enough already with this. Why do we have to be stuck with these people to tell us what to do all the time, And so anyway, I'm sorry, I'm kind of ranting and raving, but, so Biden is now, in the broadest sense, he is here to restore America's commitment, the Bill Clinton, W. Bush, Barack Obama commitment to the international institutions and American dominance in Europe, in Asia, in East Asia, if you want to separate that out too. And so I don't know if you can expect any major wars because there's not really anybody to invade. I mean, a war with Iran is just cost prohibitive. There's no reason to really worry about that. The Ayatollah is not going to do anything stupid, and they're not doing anything that the Americans can invoke as an excuse to attack them. They can send special ops guys, throughout Africa to support the governments that they support. I don't know. I doubt they're going to invade and do any crazy regime change wars there. Counterterrorism stuff. Yeah, but
what I would expect is something along the lines of more Libya than Iraq. Not a boots on the ground in full-blown invasion of a country, but something more like a civil war pops up somewhere. Some country blows up that we're not even expecting right now.
Yeah.
And Joe Biden goes, let's go get them, and sends in the Air Force and backs up a bunch of rebels. And all of a sudden you have slave markets and mass murder going on all over a country.
You know what? I mean, he has a record as a hawk, and you can't make this stuff up, man. When he first entered the Senate, one of the first things he did was start complaining about Nixon's precipitous and hasty withdrawal from Vietnam. And this is the same guy we're talking about. I'm not kidding. That's Joe Biden first went to the Senate in 1972 and said Nixon needs to slow down on the ending the Vietnam War thing that he's got going on here. He's been bad on everything. Everyone, you and everybody watching this are familiar with this, incentive type based phenomenon of liberal Democratic politicians, that the more liberal they are, in fact, this is Obama's words in his brand new book, the more liberal they are, and especially if they're women, then they have to be more right wing on war to prove what tough guys they are, so that you don't call them a wimp and a hippie and a leftist and a socialist, right? So Hillary Clinton, of course, is the primary victim of this. We have to have this muscular foreign policy. I must be able to impress the generals with what a tough guy I am, so they'll take me seriously. Well, Joe Biden is this exact same way. And he spent his entire career being essentially one hair to the left of the Republicans, right? He's as right wing as a Democratic senator can be, in the sense of his devotion to corporatism primarily. And he's, of course, the senator from Delaware for 47 years, the senator from Delaware, which is known as, the core. It's like the Cayman Islands of the East Coast, right? This is the state that has the most liberal corporate laws for the most powerful corporations to be based out of there for their limited liability to get away with murder. He's been known as the senator from MasterCard. He was the guy that made it illegal to declare bankruptcy over your credit card debt. He was the guy, so there's a great book called Yesterday's Man by Bronco March-Teach, who's a leftist, but just a great attack on Biden as this right-wing Democrat. But also, I have to recommend it. So good. At Reason Magazine, The Case Against Joe Biden by Jacob Sullum. And it's like, he must have a drawer, just a file cabinet full of 40 years of things that Joe Biden has done or something. It's just incredible, this article, where, like, if I ask you, well, what are the things that you're so upset about? You say America's a police state. Oh, yeah, like what? Well, you go down the list and it's all stuff that Joe Biden invented, right? The civil forfeiture, the lack of parole on the federal level, the mandatory minimum sentences for drug possession, the massive subsidies for expanded police forces and state prisons and drug task forces of every description across the country. He spent the 1980s teamed up with Strom Thurmond, the former Dixiecrat Klansman, and they teamed up together to attack Ronald Reagan from the right for not being tough enough on drugs and crime. He was the guy who pushed for the creation of the drug czar, who pushed for the drug war down in Latin America, against the people of Peru and Colombia and wherever out in the wilderness growing the coca on the supply side. Peasants mostly, right, getting sprayed with chemical weapons and all this, to kill their crops, and this just madness. Like I say, civil forfeiture, mandatory minimum sentences, the crack disparity, where if you have the exact same amount of weight of cocaine, but it's in crack form, then you get like 100 times the sentence. He was the guy who pushed that. You can find footage of him from like 1994 with a quarter or a nickel in his hand, going, yeah, anybody who has a nickel of cocaine like this, a rock of cocaine, we put him in prison for 20 years, and ranting and raving about what a tough guy. Don't you call Biden a liberal. Don't you call Biden a hippie. Don't you call Biden a sissy. Don't you call Biden, a weak, wimpy reason why you can't trust liberals to protect the country. Boy, he's the toughest Democrat hombre you ever seen. That's been the way that he has carried his entire political career. And then the one exception where he was wise was he opposed Iraq War I 30 years ago, which got us into this entire catastrophe in the Middle East. Absolutely unforced error, and he was against it. But guess what? Everybody loved that war. Operation Yellow Ribbon, man, it was a big hit. And Joe Biden was embarrassed, just like John Kerry. They were embarrassed. Bill Clinton was only the governor of Arkansas at the time, but he opposed the war. I publicly said we shouldn't do this. And so Bill Clinton, Hillary, and Kerry and Biden, they all had to live this down through the 1990s, that they were the wimpy liberal Democrats who made the wrong bet on Iraq War I, bet, on a partisan basis against President Bush Sr. So now they are never going to make that mistake again. So then Joe Biden, particularly, he was the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee in the Senate in 2002. So he didn't just support the war. He didn't just vote for the war. He was Bush and Cheney's handmaiden in the Senate. He was their whip in the Senate to force the war through on the Democratic majority side. And so, and he held a couple of days of bogus hearings where only hawks were allowed to testify with a bunch of lies. And the people who knew they were lies were disallowed from testifying.
Yeah, there's this weird effect that goes on when Donald Trump was president, where everybody that came before, so long as they don't like Trump, kind of had their history whitewashed.
Right.
With Joe Biden, well, no, not with you, but in the public side, especially with the left. You look at the way they talk about George W. Bush. Look at the way they talk about John McCain. Look at they elected Joe fucking Biden, right? And nobody ever wants to talk about Joe Biden's 47 years in the Senate. Apparently, he had a complete clean slate to these people.
I'll say
they just pretended it didn't exist.
I'll stick up for the leftists here because, a lot of times libertarians and right wingers, we kind of conflate the left as being, the left half of American politics, but that's not really right. It's a very, parsable spectrum of left-wing politics in America, where, and my definition is not necessarily universal, but it's close, right? Where you have the centrist moderate types are basically right in the center. You have the liberals who are still just Democratic partisans who don't know anything and have no principle really whatsoever, but who lean left basically and are Democrat partisans. And then to the left of them, you have the progressives, and then the socialists and the communists and the anarcho-communists and the different, the further left you go. And once you get really even to some serious progressives and, starting to get into the socialist side of that, they hate the Democrats. They hate Joe Biden. They've always hated Joe Biden. Joe Biden to them is nothing but George W. Bush. The same as Joe Biden to me is nothing but George W. Bush. And they have clear eyes on that. And part of that is because they're so blind that they think that private property ownership and capitalism is the root of all evil in the world. And since the Democrats are not socialists, they do believe in business and property and capitalism. That makes them right-wing fascists to a leftist. But the reality is they are right-wing fascists, right? Because they don't believe in free markets. They believe in this mixed economy, this quasi-free market that the Republicans and the Democrats have created for us over the last 100 years. That is, as Robert Higgs says, participatory fascism. We don't have a Mussolini, although Trump would have sure liked to have been one. He could only rally about 10% of the population to buy into that. So we have regular elections, but we have an absolutely corrupt, criminal, evil empire police state in a state of permanent war.
Yeah, and
you might call it
about
F fascism, but it's fascism, all right. And it's the liberals, it's the centrists that's what they've been upholding all this time.
Yeah, and you combine that with the fact that American foreign policy is absolutely imperialistic, and it's not quite fascist Italy and fascist Germany. We don't want to annex Iraq, but it's a step below that, and not that big of a step below that. Sure, we don't want to annex Iraq, but that comes with a whole lot of problems that nobody wants to deal with. But we sure will occupy them and control their government and tell them what to do. And God damn it, if they don't do what we say, bomb the shit out of them. Right? Yep. So that's not much better for the Iraqis themselves than outright annexation might be.
Right. I mean, and the thing of it is, too, anybody who's honest, I know people get all caught up in patriotism and emotions and honor and valor and all of this stuff. But come on. The Pentagon is a government program. Harry Brown, the former libertarian candidate 20 years ago, used to say, it's just the post office with M16s. Why would you, if Barack Obama says to David Petraeus, hey, David Petraeus, 4-star general, if I give you a bunch of 19-year-olds with rifles, can you remake Afghan society for me into something compliant with American wishes? David Petraeus will say, sir, yes, sir, I sure as hell can do that. But is that realistic? That's like, he could ask him, if I give you a bunch of 19-year-olds with rifles, can you build me a highway across the Swiss Alps? Can you, set off a good episode of the Ice Capades down at the big arena tonight? Or are there things that are outside of the area of specialty of 19-year-old men with rifles who, after all joined up because they saw on TV that if they joined the army, they'd be fighting against an enemy army, not patrolling a neighborhood, killing the men of the neighborhood. The whole thing is this nasty bait and switch where guys, if you're in a firefight in Afghanistan, there's not an army. You're not fighting an army. You're fighting Minutemen. Essentially,
it's that can-do attitude that a lot of the military have that leads them to believe that they can do more than they're actually capable of. And it's really bad the higher up in the ranks you go. Once you get to like colonels and generals, they all think that they can do whatever the fuck you ask them to do.
Yep.
Right? Like, well, I never got past the rank of E4 when I was in the Air Force, but I could see the way a lot of people who are higher up are. Like, the idea is, hey, if you can do something, you never say no. You never say, no, well, that's kind of not what we do. It's always, yeah, I can do that. And then you go back and go, oh shit, how the fuck am I going to do that? That doesn't make any sense. And
Right.
you find a way to do it somehow. But of course, the goals given to a lot of these people completely unrealistic. Like you said, you can't take a bunch of 19, 20-year-olds, put them in a rural village in Afghanistan and expect them to make Afghanistan, of all places, into a thriving American-like democracy. It's just never going to happen. And the attempt to make it so is just taking more lives, depleting the treasury, and weakening America's position in the world. It's not making us stronger. It's not making us safer. It's not making us richer. It's bringing the country down and tearing it to pieces internally.
Absolutely right. I mean, and look, I make this case all the time. I'm sorry to be kind of redundant, but think of the counterfactual like this, okay? Never mind stupid, horrible Al Gore, okay? Forget about him. What if Bush had won the election in 2000, but instead of running with Dick Cheney and then naming Donald Rumsfeld and all the neoconservatives on Richard Pearl's list to run the Pentagon and the National Security Council? What if he had just kept Cheney, Rumsfeld out, the neoconservatives out, and had just listened to Colin Powell, his Secretary of State, who, after all, the people who voted for Bush in 2000, they were saying things like, don't worry, he's got Colin Powell up there to handle foreign policy for him, so it's going to be great. We all know we can count on good old Colin Powell, right? But of course, he wasn't calling the shots. It was Cheney and Rumsfeld, Cheney especially, who was calling the shots on foreign policy, not Colin Powell. And Powell did go along with it. I'm not saying he was innocent, but if it had been up to him, Iraq War II would have never happened. It would have never happened. And Afghanistan probably would have. And they would have screwed it up and it would have been bad. And we might still be there the way we are right now. But Iraq War II, and then therefore Libya, Mali, Syria, Yemen, none of these had to happen at all. All those flow from Iraq War II. And the entire chaos of the Middle East, the sectarian war that's killed probably 2 million people since then. Never mind if the Democrats had won. Just if Bush had listened to Powell instead of Cheney, we would be living in an entirely different century right now than the one that we've been living through.
And that's part of the tragedy of the early years of the war on terror, is they were so fixated on expanding the war that they didn't allow themselves to learn from Afghanistan, right? They got into Afghanistan, they beat the Taliban quickly, they occupied the capital, like, we won. That was easy. Man, what are we going to do next? And they didn't sit back and think, oh shit, how are we going to get out of here now? They just thrust themselves into the next war because they didn't think there'd be any consequences for it. And here in the year 2021, we're still in Afghanistan and we're still dealing with the expanded consequences of invading Iraq.
Yep. Still got guys in Iraq too.
Yep.
Fighting Iraq War, I call it Iraq War 3.5 against what's left of the Islamic State there after Iraq War 3.
Absolutely. Now, I would primarily define the foreign policy of Donald Trump as criminally incompetent. This is a guy that kept saying he wanted to withdraw troops from Syria, and then some guy in his administration was openly lying to him the whole time about troop numbers in Syria, and he never bothered to confirm that. He just allowed this fucker to lie to him. And, I see a lot of Trump supporters make excuses for that. Like, oh, he didn't know. He wanted them out, but he didn't know because they were lying to him. Like, that's not an excuse. You're just saying that your president is grossly incompetent instead of lying to you. That's not any better. It's still just
the art of the deal.
Right. This is that was supposed to be the guy he was. They elected him to be that guy, to get things done, to be the guy who makes deals and can convince people to move in his direction. That's who Trump supporters thought they were electing. What they actually elected was a big giant buffoon who didn't know jack shit and just allowed people to lie to him for 4 years. Completely worthless.
And look, I mean, here's the thing too. I gotta say, I have such sympathy with people who want to believe in Trump, have wanted to believe in Trump. I mean, the man stopped Jeb Bush and Hillary Clinton both in 1 year for us. All of mankind owes him a debt of gratitude forever for that. And the reality is, even though he's a rich billionaire from New York City, he's not really. He's from Queens. He's a white trash scumbag loser, nobody to the real, Brooks Brothers set, whatever, powerful people in New York. He wants to be like them, but they spit on him. He's not one of them. So what power faction does Donald Trump represent in America? The answer is nobody. I mean, not even the neocons, right? The neocons hate him too. He went along with Sheldon Adelson and John Hagee, some of the born again preachers, and whatever Benjamin Netanyahu wanted. But the vanguard of the Zionist movement in America were like, this guy is uncouth. He's disgusting. Bill Kristol and the whole axis of Kristol, all the neocons became the never Trumpers, no matter how Zionist, no matter how, and he absolutely bent over backwards for the Israelis his whole presidency long, recognizing their seizure of the Golan Heights, claiming the legality, no longer recognizing the illegality of Israeli settlements on the West Bank, and moving the embassy to Jerusalem, which is a tacit acceptance of Israeli claim of jurisdiction and sovereignty over the entire city, precluding the possibility of a Palestinian independent state there, and all the rest of this stuff. But go down the list of who's got power in America. Even it started at the bottom of the list with like Hollywood. They hated him, right? He's a weird right-wing, uncouth, terrible person to them. They're all good liberal types. So they didn't support him. Agribusiness? No. The arms industry? Well, later, yeah, but not at first. It's not like he was their guy. The CIA and the military? No. He got Mike Flynn to stand up there next to him to give him a little bit of legitimacy. But was the Pentagon itself like the pro-Trump faction during the election of 2016? No. Wall Street? Absolutely not. Hillary Clinton was Wall Street's candidate, just like Joe Biden was this time too. So if you're a regular Joe air conditioner repairman living in Kansas City and you're looking at Donald Trump, you're going, well, and this is what fooled people about Obama because he was black. They go, well, I guess he's not one of them. If he's black, he can't possibly be one of them. Maybe he's not one of us. I don't know who he is, but at least he's not one of them. But it turns out, yeah, he was. He was just Hillary Clinton. He was absolutely a center-left establishment, imperialist toady the whole time. Essentially,
he was Hillary with a smile.
That's right. And he was backed by extreme power factions in America, particularly Wall Street. If people don't know this, it's hilarious. Go read it in the WikiLeaks, where the vice president from Citigroup tells Obama who his cabinet's going to be. And it's right there in the email. You're going to keep George Bush's Secretary of Defense, Robert Gates. You're going to put Hillary at State. You're going to put Geithner at Treasury, and on down the list. Marching orders from the vice president of Citigroup in Chicago telling Obama, this is your cabinet, Mr. President. Here are your marching orders. It's amazing. I love it. But anyway, so Donald Trump, though, he really is not one of them. He truly is not one of any them. Right. And so people want to believe then that so he's going to stick it to them for us. And of course, he is very brash and rude and aggressive and stuff. So maybe he'll do the right thing. But then that just never pans out because, as you said, the guy's just a buffoon. There is no substance there. He reads at about a fourth grade level. He can read a thing like a speech out loud. He can get through it. But he's not the kind of guy who could sit and read a few articles with breakfast in the morning. He just doesn't do that. Like George W. Bush, and I'm not picking on everybody who doesn't read. Not everybody's a reader. Some people's eyes just glaze over, and that ain't them. I'm not calling them stupid, but I'm just saying that's who Donald Trump is. He ain't a reader. He never really thought about any of these things. He'd look at the Iraq War and go, this war is stupid. God, what a waste. Right? But any idiot could tell you that. So that's what you got. You have a guy who, as soon as he says, well, that's stupid, we should not be there, the military responds and they go, well, Mr. President, actually, it's very important that we're there. And then he goes, you got me, checkmate, and I lose and you win, because he doesn't have another thing to say. He doesn't have a single rejoinder back. And so
Yeah,
we know there are anecdotes. We have all the anecdotes from his presidency on Afghanistan, on Somalia, on Syria, as you mentioned, over and over again. He goes, I want out. And the military just says, no, we can't leave because. And he goes, okay. You know,
yeah, Donald Trump
there's a
definitely.
new Woodward book that in March of 2017, a month into the presidency, basically, he orders Mattis to withdraw all troops from Afghanistan. I want out of Afghanistan now. We don't need to deal with the Taliban. Let's just go. I want out of Afghanistan, and I want out of South Korea too. And Mattis just says, yes, sir, Mr. President. And then as they walk out of the room, he says to his aide, we're not doing that. And they just ignore it. And then, as you said, there's no follow-up, right? This guy is a complete flake. And so instead of saying 2 hours later or the next day, hey, how's my troop withdrawal from Afghanistan coming? He's looking at his hair on TV and saying, oh, no, it doesn't look just right. And so whatever. And he forgot all about Afghanistan and Korea. And that was, and Mattis and them joked about this, right? That they would go in there and remove papers from his desk for good or for ill. Who knows? Sometimes he wanted to do some completely horrible harebrained things like, murder Bashar al-Assad or God knows what. And they would just go, nah, and refuse to obey his orders. And then he would never follow up. And so it would never happen, whether we're talking about leaving Afghanistan or killing Assad or whatever it was. And so his government was essentially on autopilot. And look at Russia. He ran for president. I want to get along with Russia. So either that was a lie and he's the world's worst Russia hawk, or he actually wasn't in charge of his own government's Russia policy at all. We got.
Yeah, it's like the idea that he was president and actually had the power to control these issues never really sank in with him. It's like, yeah, he wanted to be president for the ego boost. It's because Donald Trump is the greatest thing to ever happen to mankind. And of course, Donald Trump being president would just be the best. No one can be president like Donald Trump in his own mind. Right. But then he gets in there. He doesn't have a philosophy. Right. He's just Donald Trump is the best. That's as far as it goes. Right. So as long as he's sitting in the chair, that's good enough for him. And people love him. And he's got tons of people that love him. But he never internalized the fact that he actually has the power to change these things. And he never followed through that. He valued loyalty to him personally more than he valued people who would actually carry out policies that he wanted.
Yep.
So this is what you get. You get 4 years of nothing.
He never even said, loyalty is more important than the policy thing, or, and what loyalty, right? He picked John Bolton. There's no loyalty, he picked, what loyalty did Rex Tillerson owe to Donald Trump, the CEO of Exxon, the most powerful corporation in the world? Rex Tillerson is like 15 feet tall. What does he owe Donald stinking Trump for making him Secretary of State for a little while? Not much. And when you read about these guys, they all agreed. Tillerson and Mattis and McMaster, and they brought in Dan Coates was the National Intelligence Director, and they all agreed that we're going to stop this guy from doing any of the things he wants. And, I think Tillerson and Mattis had a deal that one of them would always be in D.C. They would never both be out of town at the same time, where they would be unable to countermand his orders. Again, for good or for ill. He wants out of Syria, belayed. He wants to assassinate Assad over some sarin hoax, belayed. So, and in fact, I don't know if you know about this one. Last March, when tensions are really heating up between the U.S. and Iraq, with the Shiite militias and the accusations against Kataib al-Hezbollah and all this, the general in charge of the Iraq war now, the current Iraq war, General White, sent a memo to Secretary Esper that essentially, I'm paraphrasing from the New York Times story about this here. The memo essentially said, listen up, Mr. Secretary. Maybe you ain't know the difference between a Sunni and a Shia, but I do. And let me tell you, it matters. And right now we are fighting with the Shia against the Sunni terrorists. Get it? But if you want to change the target of this war and you want to target the Shiite militias and get into a war with them and maybe even with Iran, then I'm going to need tens of thousands more troops. Do you read me loud and clear? And then Esper went, geez, you know what? I guess maybe it is time for me to learn the difference between the shirts and the skins over in that war. Where, our guys.
Do you think they already know that?
Yeah, no, I mean, if they bomb Iran, or if they really, pick a massive fight with Khatib al-Hezbollah or Asayb al-Haq, these Shiite militias, our guys could really get the Order 66 treatment, from Star Wars 3, where the clones just shoot all the Jedi in the back. We have white special operations forces, just like the old British Empire, right? White special operations forces leading the native troops on the ground, basically, right? In these hits against ISIS there. Well, we get into a fight with these Shiite militias and with the Iranians. Those same guys that our guys are embedded with are going to shoot them right in the back. These are the guys that they've been fighting for 17 years. And just think about where we're at, man, where our Secretary of Defense was a Raytheon lobbyist. And him and the president are so interested, and the Secretary of State, Pompeo, are so interested in this maximum pressure policy against Iran and picking this fight with Iran. And they don't even know who are the shirts and the skins on the ground in Iraq. They got thousands of guys on the ground in Iraq. Mike Pompeo, the Secretary of State, he doesn't understand what their mission is. He doesn't understand the jeopardy that he's putting them in. So the general has to write a letter to the Secretary of Defense and essentially to the president saying, are you guys paying attention here? And look what's about to happen. And we could lose our army in Iraq if you guys pick this fight for me. That's the kind of buffoonery we're talking about here, inattention to detail with these guys. Trump says we're in Iraq because we got to keep an eye on Iran. No, we're in Iraq embedded with the same guys that Iran backs to fight against the bin Ladenites on the other side, Donald. But nope.
It's almost like these people just want wars to continue funneling money to their cronies in the arms industry. But that's just cynical me thinking that can't possibly be the case.
You know what it is? It's $1 trillion a year. As William S. Lynn, the military strategist, put, he said, this is the biggest honeypot in the history of the world. There's never been anything like this. $1 trillion a year of defense budget money up for appropriation. And so, it isn't like we're the Romans or the British going over there and invading and moving our population to these countries, enslaving their people in our sugarcane fields or stealing their gold, this kind of thing. Our companies get sweet oil contracts sometimes, but that's not it. It's the money spent on the war itself. It's, as Garrett Garrett wrote back in the 1950s in Rise of Empire, everything goes out. Nothing comes back. So it's not like we're going on a mission to Iraq to take a bunch of wealth from them. As Donald Trump complained, why don't we just steal all the oil? Why even have a war if it's not to steal all the oil? It's to sell all the planes, to sell all those tanks, all those MRAPs, all those rifles, all those boots and shoelaces and tubes of toothpaste, all those contracts to the Pentagon to keep the whole thing going. And then listen, and you can look this up. They do studies like this all the time where Raytheon, Lockheed, Northrop Grumman, General Atomics, General Dynamics, and SIAC, and a few of these others, just one handful of these corporations, they spend a measly $10 million a year or so each on backing the think tanks that write the studies. I mean, and not even, over maybe $1 million a year, a couple of million a year, and on lobbying Congress and the think tanks that write the studies that justify the policies. So it's just absolute chump change. Lockheed, I don't know, they cash hundreds of billions of dollars worth of government checks every year, hundreds of billions of dollars. And then for them to pay to prop up the Center for a New American Security and the Council on Foreign Relations and the Center for Security Policy and whatever, in order to make all this crap seem necessary, is pennies on the dollar, not even fractions of pennies in cost. And it's all free money anyway. It's all the money they got from the Treasury anyway. They're just recycling the smallest percentage of it back into the propaganda campaign to keep it all going. and it works like a charm. And
Exactly.
you can buy, there's this great I don't know what you call him, expert named Ben Freeman at a good think tank, whatever it's called. And he went and showed how when they were debating about the Yemen war and whether they were going to pass, the Senate was going to pass the war powers resolutions trying to force Trump to end the war in Yemen, how this is all they do. This is the simplest trick in the world, like easier than pulling a rabbit out of a hat, right? All that happens is Saudi Arabia hires a lawyer, and the lawyer donates to the senator. And the lawyer says to the senator, "Hi, I'm a lawyer. I represent Saudi Arabia. Here's a bunch of money," which is just no different than the Saudis themselves putting the money right in the senator's pocket. But guess what? 3,000 measly stinking bucks, which again is just nothing but chump change to the Saudis and the people buying influence with that money. 3,000 measly stinking dollars will get you a senator to change his vote from against the genocide in Yemen to for the genocide in Yemen. It's nothing. And that's why we can't stop it. That's why we can't turn the racket off. There's just too much money in it, and there's no avenue to interrupt the flow.
Yeah, and Donald Trump was never going to be the one to stop that. Donald Trump was not a Ron Paul. He wasn't even a Rand Paul. There was no principle anti-war philosophy.
That's exactly how I
behind
said
the
it.
facade.
He wasn't even Rand, much less Ron. Is exactly right.
Yeah, so like if you really want someone to end wars, you need someone who has the courage of his convictions.
We should talk about Biden more. You tried to ask me about Biden, but I think the subject to the history. So Biden, well, I did talk about Biden a bit, but Biden's future here. Let me say a thing that's interesting about Biden. Biden killed his good son. And what I mean by that is he lied us into war with Iraq. And he deployed his son to Iraq, who was stationed at the base near the Mosul Dam, right next to a burn pit. He came home and died of brain cancer. And it's just a certainty that that's where he got his brain cancer, okay? And this is something that's afflicting soldiers and troops of all descriptions from all services from the wars. And so, and he didn't learn that till late in the game. Like he already knew the war was a disaster. He opposed the surge by 2007. He was like, "Oh man, this George Bush has just done this all wrong," and all that stuff. I'm sorry, I'm not sure what year Bo died or what year that Biden became, aware of what was going on here. But what happened was, I'm gonna pretend and say it was like 2014 or 15. A book came out by Joseph Hickman, who's already an American hero for other reasons. But anyway, he wrote this book called The Burn Pits. And one of the chapters is about Bo. He got his own chapter. Bo Biden died of brain cancer from the burn pit from Iraq War II. And at that point, I don't know how I know this anymore, but I read this somewhere, that book was brought to Joe Biden's attention. And that was how he came to find out that his son had died in the war. And you might have seen the clip of the soldier confronts him and says, "We went to Iraq because you sent us there. And so it's your fault and you suck and our friends died over there," and this kind of thing. And he goes, "Oh yeah, well, my son died too." And they go, "Well, so we didn't say anything about your son." And he goes, "Well, you better not." And they're like, "Well, whatever.
Yeah,
you're the one who
killed him.
Yeah.
Like, why are you getting mad at me? You're the one that killed him.
And you're the one who brought him up anyway. Nobody said anything about that, right? He was the one who said, and then he storms off. That's his excuse. But the thing is, and of course, like there's somebody who lost their little brother over there who got shot or blown up. I don't know how they would feel. I don't think that that Bo Biden counts as a combat casualty of that war directly. I don't know how people categorize that, but he died from that war, if not in that war, of Gulf War II illness, if you want to call it that, as what it is. And so, Joe Biden is a guy, as much as I hate him and resent him and detest all of his policies and everything, he's a guy who's lived through a lot of tragedy. His wife ran a stop sign and got killed. Her and his daughter were both killed. His, I think, baby daughter were killed, which, by the way, this goes to show what a son of a bitch he is. He spent years outright just lying and smearing the guy who crashed into his wife and accusing him of being a drunk driver. Oh, yeah, this truck driver out there who drank his lunch that day, blah, blah, blah. That was an outright lie. She ran the stop sign. It's a tragedy, but she ran a stop sign out in front of this truck driver who then she put in the position of being a man who killed a woman and a little girl. Even though it was her fault, he hit her. You understand how a T-bone works, right? And so this guy already had to live with the fact of that horrible car wreck that he was in. That wasn't his fault. And then he's got a U.S. senator smearing him for the rest of his life and accusing him of being a drunk driver and killing this lady out of his own criminal negligence when it was her fault entirely. That Joe Biden is such scum. But anyway, so he lost his wife, he lost his daughter, and then he killed his good son and is left with his scumbag criminal crackhead son who's, you know, a money launderer for Chinese corporations connected to the People's Liberation Army and is surely going to prison. And he's got to resent the fact that he knows that he dug this grave, man. I mean, the car wreck, that wasn't his fault. But the son thing, he had one scumbag son and one good son, and he killed the good one. And he's got to be human enough to regret that and to be able to. I'm not saying that he's got wisdom. I'm saying that he's got to be just burnt as a roach by experience by now. Like, how could he get on board for any of this shit? And, you know, here's something I read about him too, that I don't want to read too much into this. I'm not all like hope and change for Joe Biden. Don't get me wrong. But I read a thing that said, and I guess I hadn't really thought about it this way. You know, I knew that he took the least worst position on the Obama cabinet during the Afghan war surge debate. You know, the generals basically pressured Obama into it. Biden tried to tell him, you don't have to do this. And he did support escalation, just not as bad, you know. But I read a thing that said that, you know, after all, he was 30 years older than Obama, right? Or more, I don't know. Much older than Obama. And he saw himself, well, yeah, 30 years. So he really saw himself as like Obama's protector. Like it was his job to kind of run interference for the new young president, to let him know that, look, these generals can be really intimidating with their declarative statements and their shiny shirts and everything. However, you're the boss, not them, and you don't have to give into this pressure and this kind of thing. He felt that that was his responsibility, right? Just because of the age difference thing there, you know, as like a father figure almost to the young new president. So, and look, he's old enough, and who knows, he might be completely cuckoo bananas by the day after Inauguration Day and unable to, you know, finish a thought. I think he's probably got a couple of years in him in the chair there still, probably. And I think that he's probably old enough and possibly somewhat jaded by enough now to tell generals, actually, no, I said no, and you heard me the first time, dismissed, and just not be impressed by their crap. And you know, there's really not any countries left to attack that can't hit us back. You know, you know, he's made it very clear that he wants to keep counterterrorism forces in the Middle East in order to fight bin Ladenites wherever they are. You know, his cabinet is so bad. I think there's a possibility that they would push him to try to go back to Syria. But I think he knows better. You know, you look at that Harvard speech.
We all have to hope for that, because if he decides to go after Syria again, I don't think the country has the appetite for that. Quite frankly, everyone is so focused on COVID that if Joe Biden comes down and says, war in Syria, and we're like, the fuck? You gave millions of dollars to Pakistan for gender studies. Now you want to go to war in Syria,
right?
And I don't think anybody in this country at this point in time has any appetite.
Yeah, fake sarin
war.
attack over there ain't going to do it. Now, fake sarin attack here, that might be enough.
Oh, that would do it.
Yeah, but I really think that that's right. That you know, a civil war breaking out somewhere or anything like that, it's not going to be enough. It would take another massive attack on this country. You know, because people say, "Oh yeah, start a war to unite people and whatever," but not when people are this cynical. Not when everybody knows that trick, right? When people will just. They won't believe in it unless, I mean, I don't know what. You'd have to nuke Kansas City at this point or something to get people to rally together again, like 9/12 style, you know. Those days are over. And
Yeah.
although it could happen. I mean, here's the thing of it, right? And this can't really be, you know, underestimated or overstated. Obama and Trump, well, Obama, especially in Libya and Syria and in Yemen, and Trump in Yemen, they fought for Al Qaeda for years. And they have built up the strength of Al Qaeda. You know, and sometimes, you know, when TV says that Al Shabaab counts as Al Qaeda, you know, this indigenous militia in Somalia, you can roll your eyes at that. But, you know, Al Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, they helped coordinate the September 11th attack. They bombed the Cole. They tried to blow up a plane over Detroit on Christmas Day 2009. They did the Charlie Hebdo attack in France in 2015. They're real ass anti-American, international, dangerous terrorists. And we've been fighting a war for them for 6 years in straight now in Yemen. And if Biden comes in and ends the war against the Houthis on his first day in office, well, that's still just the beginning of a brand new day in Yemen, because we still have now Al Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, more powerful than they've ever been before by, who knows, thousands and thousands of people. And they are right now in the UAE's militia, getting paid salaries with money taken right out of your paycheck, you know, fighting with weapons that were bought by you and your family. Are now, you know, you can, even the Obama friendly CNN showed Al Qaeda terrorists driving around in MRAP, armored personnel carriers. I guess this was in Trump years, right? when they said that, they forgot to mention this was Obama's fault. Obama started it in 15. Obama, you know, Trump continued it for 4 more years after that. So, and then I should say, so Blinken, the new Secretary of State, he's horrible, but he's just Biden's guy. So he's as horrible as Biden wants him to be or not, I think, is the extent of that. But the National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, he's horrible, dude. He's Hillary Clinton's man. And for 4 years, he was her right-hand man. Horrible on Libya, horrible on Syria. He's the guy in the emails, you know, being cheeky, I guess he thinks, saying, hey, look, boss, see, note, last item, AQ is on our side in Syria. And he wasn't saying, hey, wait a minute, are we making a mistake? We're backing the same insurgency in Syria that Zawahiri's backing. Maybe we need to call a meeting. Maybe we need to call the lawyers. Maybe we need to call this off. Instead, he's just saying, tee-hee, isn't this funny and ironic that we're fighting on the same side of a war that Ayman al-Zawahiri, the butcher of New York City, is fighting on? This is now going to be the new National Security Advisor. And, you know, Danny Sherson went and found all these great quotes where they ask him about Yemen. And he's saying, well, I think that the particular set of security challenges facing Saudi Arabia at this time continues to necessitate our assistance in those endeavors. Oh, just, man, you know. And then they asked him about Libya. Hey, Libya is the worst thing that happened since Iraq, but before Syria. But anyway, how do you like Libya now there, Jake? And he goes, well, you know, when asked to judge whether the pros versus the cons outweigh the assumption of the negative reaction of the overall long-term satisfaction of the equation, I think that actually is not settled yet whether that's a good idea or not. And so, in other words, he's a cold-blooded sociopathic killer.
Very, very clear there. All right. Well, we've been going for close to an hour. I think we're going to settle it right there. Where can people go to hear more of your thoughts?
Okay. So I'm the director of the Libertarian Institute. That's libertarianinstitute.org. And I'm the editorial director of antiwar.com. That's the most important project on the internet. I hope everybody understands. You can see behind me somewhere back there, I wrote Fool's Errand, Time to End the War in Afghanistan. And you can get that in audiobook too.
Book.
And brand new, I just got the galleys today, the proofs. I'm checking over today. My brand new book. You can see not for resale right there thing. Enough already. Time to end the war on terrorism. This is every war in the Middle East from Jimmy Carter through right now. And it should be
Is this
out. I want to have it out on the 16th. We'll see how it goes.
Is this the book that was all supposed to be one book and you had to split into different ones? I remember Fool's Errand, you were supposed to go into different wars and you only got to Afghanistan because it was just too long at that point.
Right. So this is the book that Fool's Errand started out life to be. And then I got stuck on chapter 2 and it became a whole book about Afghanistan. Now it has been reduced in size back down to chapter 2 length. And then there's Iraq War 2, Somalia, Pakistan, Libya, Syria, Iraq War 3, did I say Mali, and Yemen, and the war at home.
Well, as somebody who greatly enjoyed the audiobook of Fool's Errand, I cannot wait for this new one to come out so I can pick it up and read it immediately. Thank you so much for that. And thank you for coming on the show. It's been a great episode. Can't wait to see what else you have coming out in the future. Thank you, Scott.
Appreciate it, man.
All right, everybody. That's it for us. Remember, if you want to see more episodes of Roads to Liberty, go to think-liberty.com and subscribe to the Think Liberty Network on your favorite podcasting app. And if you want to buy some Roads to Liberty merch, roads2liberty.com is the website to do that. All right, everybody. That's it for tonight. Tune in on Tuesday for the next episode of